Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Wrestling is something that people seem to either love or hate. Actually, that's not true at all, is it? But you know what I mean. Big sweaty men and women slapping each other in pants have been entertaining people for generations now, and even though I don't really follow it nowadays, I definitely went through a phase of being obsessed with it, and especially loving the toys you could get in the early 90s. Of course, it's also the perfect thing to adapt into video games, and there are hundreds of games out there based on the greasy grapplers. So for this video, I've had to tag in some of my content creating friends to talk about some wrestling games. So how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at those games. Let's start on the NES with WWF Wrestlemania Challenge. This isn't the first WWF game that was ever released. In fact, I don't think it was even the first one on the NES, but it was the first one that I owned, and I bloody loved it. And actually, I kind of still enjoy it today. It doesn't mean it's good though. This is a 1 or 2 player game, and you can choose to play one-on-one matches, tag matches, or even 3-way tag matches, which is actually quite impressive for a game like this. One of the cool things about going back to these old wrestling games are the characters that you get to choose from. Here you've got the likes of Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, Macho Man Randy Savage, along with some that definitely aren't as well remembered nowadays, like Brutus the Barber Beefcake, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who by the way was my favourite toy, Ravishing Rick Rude, and even yourself. And how do they know what I look like? It's mad. So you choose your character and then you play through a series of matches against the other wrestlers, trying to become the champ. You've got an isometric view and the characters all look kind of charming, and if you know them, you can actually tell who they're meant to be, which is pretty cool. And you have a surprising amount of moves for a NES wrestling game and just 2 buttons. You've got a punch button and a grapple button. Punches are weak and the grapples are a lot more powerful. You can also hold either button to do a stronger variation of a punch or grapple, and pressing both at the same time does a very powerful strike move, but will take your health as well. There are quite a few moves you can do here as well. There's suplexes, atomic drops, sleeper holds and more. Now I can't actually tell you how to do specific moves. It seems to depend on where you are in relation to the character when you do the move, and you even have leg drops, elbow drops and stomps. It can be hard to connect with attacks at times as your opponents are always running around, and it will take a few matches to get used to how it all works, but it does work. If you're playing a tag or a 3-man match, you can swap players by just walking to the edge of the ring. What's cool is that your health does constantly replenish, even if you're the character in the ring, and by swapping character it happens faster. So really this is probably where Capcom got their idea from their tag games. The 3-way fights are loads of fun here, and I really do find this game quite addictive. It's got cool music as well, with NES versions of the entrance themes that play depending on who's in the ring. You can also play this in 2-player, either against a friend or on the same team. Now I probably like this a lot more than I should because I owned it growing up, but coming back to it now I still had fun with it and would recommend checking it out. Not to be left out, WCW also got a game on the NES, just called World Championship Wrestling. This is the first time I've played this game, and probably the last, though I have to say it really did seem to have some good ideas. In terms of gameplay modes, you get exactly what you'd expect, and you also have a pretty decent roster of characters. I didn't know who most of them were though, I'll be honest, and sadly the character select screen is just boring text and no pictures. The actual in-game graphics are actually quite good. The wrestlers are big, and while some do look pretty similar, they seem to have their trademark stuff like face paint or accessories, at least the ones I knew did. Something that's really cool here is that when you choose your character, you're then taken to a list of moves, and you can choose from 4 of them. These are all your grapple attacks, and they're assigned to a different direction on the D-pad. What I really like is that these do seem to be character specific, and while some are shared across different characters, like body slams and things like that, you actually do see character specific moves here. Then when you're in the squared circle, the action takes place from a mainly side-on view, kinda like Double Dragon but confined to a ring. You've got a punch button, and if you're holding a direction it becomes a kick button. Then the other button is to do your grapple moves that you've chosen. How it works is that you need to punch or kick your opponent a few times to stun them. Then you walk into them and grab them and press the direction of the move you want to do. Then a power bar comes up and you hold the grapple button and have to release it when the bar is as high as possible to deal the most amount of damage. This works surprisingly well when the computer gives you a chance to bloody do it. The problem here is that the hit detection of the strikes is really bad, and I found that most of my attacks just went straight through my opponent, but yep, they got no problem hitting you with everything they have. It's a real shame because the few times I got into a bit of a rhythm, it was really damn fun, and the animations for all the moves is actually really cool. Couple this with some nice features like being able to throw people out of the ring and then hit them with some weapons that the crowd give you, like bins and spanners, is really fun. I also quite like the music here, it really adds to the game. But sadly, the unfair hit detection and opponent AI just drags the whole thing down and makes it not much fun to play. I've got a feeling that if you're willing to put some time into it, then you'll be able to learn the cheap ways to win, but what's the fun in that? Oh, and I have to say, this game has some really impressive voices in it, being super clear, which only adds to the good stuff. So yeah, while I wouldn't really recommend playing this one as it's more annoying than anything, it is a close game to being great, which is such a shame. Any modders out there that can fix the hit detection would really make this game so much more fun. But anyway, now it's time for me to tag in Leathco from the Afterglow podcast.
Hello, my name is Leathco, and I am the host of Afterglow Retro Gaming Memories podcast. And I had seen that the Review Brothers were wanting to talk about wrestling games on their latest episode. And I recently did an entire month of wrestling games called Big Meaty Men Slappin' Meetin' March. But whenever I saw them, I wanted to go back to my childhood memories of wrestling video games. And a lot of my favorite ones were in the 16-bit era with those LJN WWF games. Not so popular now, but as a kid, I loved them. My first experience, we had actually rented a Super Nintendo system from the rental store, and with it, we had gotten 2 games. One was Final Fight, and the other one was WWF Super Wrestlemania. So I remember booting that game up, and you get the big, fairly clean image of Hulk Hogan on the title screen. And we played that game so long, and I would struggle to beat my uncle at it. And, I would finally beat him. It's like, yes, I'm the champion. And then my dad would come in, great, you're the champion. You got to defend your title. And I didn't want to. I'm like, no, I finally got to win. I want to retire as champion. And, of course, I would lose defending my championship. But, rented that game a few more times after I got Super Nintendo. Really enjoyed it. I never got to play the sequel, which was Royal Rumble, but I did get to play Raw, and I loved Raw so much. My favorite mode was the Royal Rumble mode, where it threw the entire roster at you, up to 6 wrestlers in the ring at a time. Last person remaining wins. You eliminate them by throwing them over the top rope. Played that mode constantly, along with the Gauntlet mode in that game, where you could face off against, I believe it was 6-on-6, although you could skip putting people on teams, so it could be, 4-on-2, 6-on-1, and you would just go through the line, match after match after match, until finally one side was out of people who could wrestle. And I really, really enjoyed that mode as well. So if you haven't played these LJN wrestling games, WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, and Raw, all of them pretty well have the same combat mechanic, where you'll get in the lockup, and the meter will show up above your wrestlers. And you'll have to tap your button fairly quick in order to win the lockup. And of course, you could cheat at this. This is one of the few times where if you had a turbo controller, you wanted to use it. Now, whenever I was a kid, you always wanted to use the first-party controller. You didn't want the third-party one, except when you played these games, because you would take advantage of that turbo feature and, try to stealthily flip it on. That way you could win the lockup. But I really enjoyed these games. They were so much fun. And I'd also like to thank the Review Brothers for allowing me to come on and share some of my memories of those old-school wrestling games with you guys.
Sticking with the Snes, here is Saturday Night Slam Masters. This is an interesting take on the wrestling genre from fighting game masters Capcom. This game isn't based on any real-life wrestling, instead having its own unique cast of characters for you to lay the smackdown with, including everyone's favourite macho mayor, Mike Hagar from the Final Fight games. The other characters all come in the crazy anime vibe, and they have some pretty cool variety. You got a wild beast man, a kabuki man, luchadors, and generic wrestler types. The gameplay is simple enough. You choose from the characters, and then you choose either a single championship or a tag championship. Then you just fight through all the other characters before getting a couple of boss fights and becoming the champ. And yep, there's a few characters to unlock here as well. Only 2 though, and from what I can see they seem to be available in the tag roster straight away, which is odd. Oh well. Every wrestler has their own entrance where they strut down to the ring, often in different attire from what they wear in the ring, which is a nice bit of detail. but they don't do too much more than just walk to the ring. I was hoping for a little more of a song and dance. Oh well. The wrestling action doesn't play like you might expect though, instead playing more like a fighting game with wrestling moves in it, rather than an actual full-on wrestling game. That's not to say there isn't a lot of wrestling here though. You've only got to worry about 3 buttons, an attack, a jump and a pin. You can punch and kick by hammering the attack button repeatedly, and to do the grapple you just walk into the opponent to grab them, the same way you would do in games like Final Fight, which makes sense as this is set in the same universe I suppose. You can do a fair amount of grapple attacks still, as well as a lot of strike combos, mostly depending on the character that you choose. They all vary in playstyle, with some being better at punching people in the face and others being better at breaking backs over their knee. And then you've got the lighter characters who are best off doing jumping attacks. There's something for everyone really. It also makes the game really fun and easy to pick up and play, and can even be played with up to 4 players if you've got a multi-tap, which is cool. At least I imagine it would be. Characters all have health bars, but you'll still need to pin them to win, but of course the lower the health, the harder it is for them to kick out. I really like the graphics here, it looks very Capcom, as are the sound and music, which is no bad thing. Some of the animations are a little bit jerky, especially with the larger characters, but it still plays well and it's got very challenging quite quickly. But it's great to go to for a few minutes every now and then to throw down a few matches. I'd say if you're looking for a hardcore wrestling experience, then you might not want to play this, as really it's more of a fighting game than wrestling, but it is still good fun. Over to the PS1 now for WWF In Your House, a game that I used to play the hell out of at my friend Nick's house. This is a wacky arcade style game that, much like Saturday Night Slam Masters, could really be seen more as a fighting game than a wrestling one. Being made by the people that did Mortal Kombat, it shares a few similarities. First of all, you've got digitised characters, which I actually love here, and again, you've got a cool selection of some that don't always get the limelight, but were big names back in the day. You've got the likes of Undertaker, Ultimate Warrior and Bret Hart, as well as things like Vader, Goldust and Ahmed Johnson. Remember him? Personally, the best one though is Hunter Hearst Helmsley when he was in his rich person persona. The actual wrestling here takes a bit to get used to, but once you do, it's really fun. You've got a weak and strong punch and kick buttons as well as a run button. The more powerful the attack, the stranger the things that happen are. You can have giant boxing gloves appear, clubs, tombstones, dog heads and all sorts. The game does not take itself seriously. You can do some punch-kick combos which do big damage, and the aim here is purely to get rid of your opponent's life bar, not to pin them, though you do actually pin them when they have no health, so I guess it's kind of both. What you'll want to do though is use the copious amounts of special moves at your disposal. As this plays more like a fighting game, you've got to do these with simple button inputs to do the special moves like you would in Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. So for example, pressing down down forward then punch, you might fire out a load of projectiles or use a taser or turn into an animal or do all sorts of crazy stuff for big damage. Of course the moves are all based on your character, so the Undertaker can shoot ghosts at people and hit them with gravestones. You can grapple people for even more throws, like suplexes, DDTs, backbreakers, and even characters seem to have their own special finisher that does loads of damage. It's all super fast paced though, and really bloody hard at times. This would be a real coin muncher in the arcades. You will need to look up a move list and practice for a little while. Also, as you're fighting, icons appear in the ring. These are either red or grey. The red ones are bad, and if you touch one, something bad will happen to you, like you'll go dizzy or lose health, or your controls will mess up. If you get a grey one, you'll get a boost, sometimes more speed or more combo on your meter, or your opponents might get dizzy. And you'll need these because the opponents aren't messing around and will kick your ass with no issues, even on the easy setting. Something I found that helped quite a lot was pausing the game and turning off blocking. Yeah, this makes it harder for you at times, but I found that most of what I was doing was just getting blocked anyway. Wrestlers here even have their own stage based on their personas, so you'll be fighting in casinos, castles, graveyards, London streets and more. This is really fun, and while it's just a background and doesn't affect the gameplay in any way, it is nice for it all to be mixed up. You've got Mr. McMahon and Mr. Perfect doing commentary, which is nice, though there's no music as you fight, which is a bit of a shame. Something I found that happened to me a lot though, is that if I pause the game during a match and then somebody wins it afterwards, it would never go to the next fight and would just crash. I'm not sure if that's a bug in the game or something to do with the totally legit way I'm playing it right now. But other than that, I find this game pretty damn fun. Again, it's not really a wrestling game as such, more a fighting game with wrestling characters, but it's fast-paced pick up and play action for anyone who wants it in their house. Here's a popular one on the PlayStation that you may have heard of. It's WWF Smackdown. At the time, this was one of the best wrestling games out there, definitely on the PS1, and honestly, it's still a whole lot of fun today. It's one of the first 3D wrestling games that I ever played and was released in the Attitude Era, which is arguably the prime for wrestling. It's got a fantastic roster of characters with the likes of The Rock, Stone Cold, Triple H and the rest of G-Generation X, Kane, Big Show, Mankind, and of course a dozen or so more that I'd totally forgotten about, like Gangrel. You've got a ton of game modes here, from championships and career modes to the usual exhibition matches, which range from one-on-one, cage matches, handicap matches and so on. There really is enough to keep you going for a hell of a long time. Couple that with a few unlockable characters, as well as a pretty good creator wrestler, and you've got a package that is just all round darn fun. Thankfully, the actual wrestling itself is also really great to play. It's easy to pick up and get going, but a good amount of depth to it if you want to put in the time, which you probably will. You've got a button that punches, and these vary depending on the direction pressed and how long you hold the buttons down for. And then you've got the grapple button, and it all works well. You just have to either press it on its own or hold a direction and press it. And these all do different moves. I couldn't quite tell, but I felt like holding it down did slightly harder attacks as well. You also have a dedicated button to doing an Irish whip and a run button for yourself, and stringing together combos of moves is easy and really fun. As you wrestle, you build up your special meter, which lets you pull off your finisher. You can build this up 5 times, so if you're good enough, you can do 5 specials in a row, which is great and often knocks out your opponent. Doing the specials is easy as well. You just have to punch your opponent or stun them, and you'll see an indicator by your character's name pop up. When it appears, you've got a few seconds to press L1 and you'll do your finisher, which often look great, and you get some decent camera angles for it all as well. And yeah, you have the usual turnbuckle and canvas attacks as well, and you're never at a loss for ways to hurt your opponent. Graphically, the game looks really bloody good for a PS1 game. The characters all have a great amount of detail and animation, including proper intros. I couldn't believe how good it looked coming back to it after so long. This is actually one I owned back in the day, and it's held up incredibly well. For some reason, this is the only Smackdown game I've ever played, probably because I'm more of a Nintendo kid, but I really need to get back into these and start playing the others, as I understand a lot of them were much better. Definitely a must-play for wrestling fans. Time to look at 4 of the best wrestling games on the N64 now, starting with WCW vs NWO World Tour. Being an N64 kid, this was my first experience with a 3D wrestling game, and boy oh boy, let me tell you, me and my friends put hours into this one, playing fatal 4-way matches for days on end. You've got a decent roster of characters here, as well as a few game modes, being your usual championships, single matches, tag matches, and 3 or 4-way ones as well. You get to choose from WCW favourites like Hollywood Hogan, Kevin Nash, the Steiner Brothers, Sting, Lex Luger and so on, but then you also have a bunch of random Japan pro wrestlers, which is pretty cool. I've got no idea who they are, but I did always make sure to try all the characters, and they play fine. Then there's some random made up characters like the Claw, the Unknown and a few others. Not sure why they really bothered with these, but hey, maybe they are actually from somewhere, and it's always nice to have more characters to play as. The wrestling mechanics here, despite being the earliest rendition of them, are still fantastic though, and would also be drastically improved in the next coming games. You've got a spirit meter rather than a health bar. This changes depending on how you're doing, so the better you're fighting, the higher it goes. This makes you faster, stronger, and actually makes it easier for you to pull off reversals, which are done with the shoulder buttons. If you're being crap, then your spirit will be low, and you'll be slower, weaker, and have a hard time reversing anything. But what makes this unique is it's more realistic, and it can change wildly during a match. Even if you're doing shit, you can still get in a good few hits, and then change the whole momentum of a match, which is really cool. Your opponents also take proper damage, so you can focus on specific limbs of an opponent, and you can keep smashing their arms or legs to make them move slower, or their head as well. You can tell if they're hurt as they'll start to hold their bits that hurt, and if they do, you'll want to throw them in a submission hold to probably make them submit. You only have 2 attack buttons here, but can do a hell of a lot with them. You can strike with B, and holding different directions or pressing it for longer will do different or more powerful attacks. And for the grapples, you also have a ton of moves. You can tap A to do a weak grapple, then you hold a direction on the D-pad and pressing either A or B, each of which being a different attack. Also, if you hold the grapple, then you do a hard grab, and again you hold a different direction on the D-pad and then press either A or B to do a much stronger attack. The risk with these ones being that they take longer and are easier to reverse or counter if someone's got a high spirit. but it just means that the characters all have dozens of moves, and when you're doing well and your spirit meter will flash, at this point you'll want to nudge the analog stick in any direction to activate your special. Then you've got about 30 seconds to get your opponent in a hard grapple, and then press the analog stick again to do your finisher. You can do this as many times as you want within the time allowed. It's fun and easy. Graphically, the game isn't particularly great, but it gets the job done. The character portraits are kinda ugly, but you can tell who everyone is. The animation, however, is fantastic, even if the characters' arms do have a tendency to detach themselves from their bodies. But anyway, we've got loads more games to look at, so I'll leave this here, and I will still say that this is a game that I still love to this day. Being the smash hit that it was, we got a second WCW game called WCW vs NWO Revenge. This is a fantastic sequel which took everything that made the first game great and just improved upon it all. In terms of gameplay and modes, it's basically the same, but now has the added inclusion of a Royal Rumble mode, which is loads of fun. The actual controls and gameplay are mostly the same, but have definitely been refined. The grappling, punching, reversing have all been improved, and it plays noticeably smoother and at a quicker pace. And it's still a ton of fun to play. The character roster has been updated. Sadly, some of the wrestlers from the previous game aren't here anymore, but mainly the dodgy made up ones, which is fine. And now you've got the two NWO factions, red and white, which I totally forgot was a thing. You've still got the likes of Sting, Hogan, Nash, Hall, etc., but now you've got people like Saturn, Eddie Guerrero, La Parka, Chris Jericho, Ultimo Dragon, and of course Goldberg. Oh, and my favourite from the time, Raven. In fact, you know how I said they got rid of the dodgy made-up characters? Well, all they did was replace them with a bunch of other ones that are stupid. But I love them, like Dr. Frank, a Frankenstein man, Aki Man, who is basically Pepsi Man but in the Aki colours, that's the people who made the game in case you weren't aware, and then there's even a bloke that dresses like an executioner. It's very random, and I actually quite like these characters, even though they didn't need to be included at all. The graphics here have had a noticeable upgrade as well. They still don't look amazing, and the characters are strange and blocky, but definitely have more detail and some fantastic animation. Again, the variety in moves and the fact that the wrestlers actually have their own stances in the ring, whereas in World Tour they all moved and looked the same, really gives them their own personalities. This is another game that I played the hell out of when it was released, and even going back to it now, it's impossible just to have one or two matches. It's a game that deserves to be played for hours, especially if you can get a few friends round to join you. This is an absolute blast. After that, Aki got the WWF license and graced the world with WWF Wrestlemania 2000, a game that took the previous WCW games and dialed everything up to 11. You get a whole host of new game modes here, like cage matches, pay-per-views, championships, and a road to WrestleMania, where you choose a character and take them on a journey to become the champ. The actual gameplay here plays very similar to the previous games, but again has definitely been refined. It's kinda hard to explain at times, but when you play, it's really noticeable. You still have the same grapple system of weak and strong attacks that let you pull off dozens of moves, as well as all your punches and kicks, turnbuckle moves, submission moves and specials. But again, it just feels better, faster and more responsive. They have added a few things like different running attacks and being able to carry weapons into the ring, and little touches that seem small but make a hell of a difference. As they've got the WWF license now, the character roster is almost entirely new, with the exception of characters that moved from WCW to WWF. You now have the likes of Stone Cold, Undertaker, The Rock, Kane, Big Show, Farouk, Al Snow, and loads more, including female wrestlers, which for the time was pretty cool. Being able to play as the McMahons is also a welcome addition as well. They also let you play around with the wrestlers, editing their appearance and creating some of your own, but it's not particularly in depth and I never really bothered with it. One of my favourite new additions, is a small one, is that you're able to use your opponent's finisher against them. You build up a special the same way as in the previous games, but instead of pressing the analog stick to pull off your move, if you press A and B at the same time, you'll do your opponent's finisher instead. I love this, and it's especially satisfying when you're playing as a smaller character and end up doing a chokeslam or powerbomb against the likes of the Big Show or Kane. It's great. Or seeing the Undertaker do a Stone Cold Stunner on Stone Cold never gets old, and is an especially good way to piss off your friends in multiplayer. You do have a few secret characters to unlock here, 7 to be precise, which isn't loads, but the roster is already massive. You'll need to play through all the game modes and beat the wrestlers, like Dude Love, when they challenge you. You can even play as JR, which is always a good thing. The graphics here are the best in the series so far, but still nothing exactly mind-blowing, and Smackdown on the PS1 looks loads better, but in terms of gameplay, this is still one of the best, but there's still one more to go. And yes, that last game is WWF No Mercy, the final WWF game released on the 64 from Aki. You know how I said WrestleMania took everything and turned it up to 11? Well, this one turns it up to about 78. I'll get this out there now, I'm one of those people that thinks this is the best wrestling game ever made, and I still stand by that. Although the game keeps the same attack and grapple mechanics as the other ones, they have once again been updated and refined to feel even more responsive, and the game moves at a noticeably faster pace, but it's even better for it. There's more grapple attacks and touches which have been added as well, like being able to do running grapples, which really adds a whole lot more than you'd expect to the gameplay. As well as this, you've got the usual game modes, and they've added ladder matches, table matches, and a Royal Rumble that is still a hell of a lot of fun to play. And the wrestling here is just so damn fun, with the spirit meter still being in place, and if you're playing against a good opponent, matches can easily last more than half an hour, but never get boring. My friend Tony and I always break this game out when we see each other for a Rock vs Stone Cold matchup, and we're probably about even on the number of wins and losses. I feel like this is the last video game that I'm ever going to play, and it'll be when we're on our deathbeds just to see who gets the last victory. Anyway, there's also a bunch of cool stuff that's been added that you can do. There's a number of fully fleshed out story modes for each of the championships. You even get cutscenes using the in-game graphics and some choices that you can make. And yes, I did make Kane the women's champion and made him compete in a bikini match. You can even take the fight into the back rooms now. If you throw your opponent out of the ring and up the ramp, you'll end up behind the scenes where you can slam your opponents into chairs, bars, and even rock bottom them through a pool table. It's just so damn fun. And this is the game that got me into character creation. There's a crazy detailed one available where you can customize just about anything and everything to do with your wrestlers, building one from scratch exactly how you want them. What's cool is that as you play you earn money, and you can visit the store to unlock a ton of new characters, as well as weapons to use, costumes and movesets that you can use in the create a character mode. What I do like is that they have sets from characters that aren't officially in the game, letting you make them yourself, presumably because they didn't have the license for the character at that time, or they were wrestling for a different faction. There really is just so much to do here, and this is a game that you can play on your own, or with friends for months and never get bored. The graphics have had another upgrade, but again, still probably aren't really going to impress you. The entrances are okay, but the limited cartridge power of the N64 means you only get a few seconds of wrestlers' music, and some pretty crappy pixelated stills of their intro. Oh well, they tried. But yeah, like I said, this game is just incredible to play. It really is a must-have for the N64, and one that I do think everyone should play for a few hours, even if you don't like wrestling. Not that you'd be watching this if you don't like wrestling. I'm pretty confident that after a few matches you'll be hooked, and even if you don't care about sweaty men in pants slapping each other, you'll want to carry on playing. But now it's time for me to shut up and know my role, as we hear from the one and only Poppy the Keaton.
Good howdy everyone, this is Poppy the Keaton, and I wanted to first off thank Martin for giving me a chance to talk about one of my surprise hidden gems and favorite wrestling games out there in Rumble Roses. Rumble Roses was released, I believe, for the PlayStation 2 by Konami back in the day. I picked it up at a video store that was going out of business, and I figured, it was on sale for $5. It was a clearance thing that, hey, $5, I'm probably going to get some cheeky, over-the-top titillation, and that'll be about it. It'll be good for a laugh, and then it'll just go on a shelf and be forgotten about. However, when I started playing this game, I was very surprised to find out that it was actually really good. And not just cheeky good, but the story was there. The story involves an evil nurse, a missing sister, some crazy mind control, and ends with just such a wild fight that I don't even want to say too much to ruin it. But yeah, the plot is there. The characters are all pretty much different stereotypes. I think you've got your sexy cowgirl, the sexy nurse. I forget what the main other characters are. Like I said, it's been 20 years. But there is both a babyface and a heel version of each character. That's good guy and bad guy, for those who don't live in the wrestling lingo. So each character has a different outfit you can unlock, and their moves are submission maneuvers. Everybody has one. They're very over the top, but fun. The gameplay itself, I should probably mention. Again, don't remember much about it. It's been 20 years, but I do remember that it wasn't bad. I don't know if it was great, but when I think about the game, I don't think about the janky gameplay, which is not something that can be said for other wrestling games. Looking at you, TNA, why couldn't I pin my opponent? So overall, no, this is a game, I know most people would probably think that you're playing it just for the jiggle physics, but it's 2024. You can find a lot of jiggle very easily. No, this one's got a wild plot that's worth playing to see. Some over-the-top mechanics, some over-the-top moves. The mud wrestling, if that's your thing, it's unique. I don't think I've ever seen mud wrestling in a different wrestling game. Not really a selling point, though. I think it's a regular match without ropes and with mud physics. But no, Rumble Roses is definitely worth looking into. I would avoid Rumble Roses 2 unless you are a huge fan of the jiggle physics and the characters of the first game. Rumble Roses 2 has no plot. It was just a cheap cash grab. The cheap cash grab that I expected Rumble Roses to be, and sours the legacy of this indeed phenomenal weird little game. Right, that's my time. Thank you, Martin, for letting me have a few moments on your channel. I should probably plug something. I don't know. Pixel Project Radio has been really good. They just put out a fun little Celeste episode. Tales from the Backlog's nice. Secret Levels, of course. Martin's covered them a few times. And, you know what? If you're a fan of Kingdom Hearts, or you've always wanted to understand Kingdom Hearts, go look out for Unlockables. They're a good little podcast where the guy's doing a deep dive of the Kingdom Hearts series. Yeah, that'll do it. Bye, everybody.
I guess as Keaton mentioned it's only fair that we look at Rumble Roses XX on the Xbox 360. This is indeed the follow-up to the PS2 game, and for the most part it plays pretty similarly, with some arcade-style wrestling in a handful of game modes. You've got a championship mode where you choose your character and then you go around various locations on a map screen, taking on various opponents in different wrestling match styles. There's a few things that happen when you do this. Firstly, you'll increase your reputation. Winning matches improves it, losing it doesn't. Makes sense. Interestingly though, you actually improve your character stats depending on how you wrestle, so you can improve strength, speed, submission, reversals and so on. There's 20 characters to choose from, plus a couple of hidden ones, and like before, this is actually 10 characters, but each one having a good and bad version of themselves. The actual wrestling is kind of confusing, but also quite simple. You've got a strike button that lets you do punch and kick combos, and then you've got a grapple button. This also lets you do a number of different attacks, and characters do usually have a fair few that you can do, though I'll be honest, I don't think I could tell you how to do a specific move. I just press the buttons in a few directions and hope for the best. Most of the time I did stuff, but sometimes it would just be a little punch, and other times I seemed to do the same thing, but would wrap them up in some complicated rope attack and stamp on their face or bust their neck or something random. Fighting well lets you build up a few meters. Firstly, there's your special meter that lets you do a finishing move by pressing LB. These are cool over-the-top attacks that would immediately murder people in real life. Then there's the embarrassment moves, where you can embarrass your opponent. These are done by blocking and reversing their attacks to build up a heart meter. I actually never got to do one of these, as I was crap at reversing here. It's something about pressing RB and either punch or grapple at the same time, so it's not really that hard, but I just couldn't figure it out for some reason. The graphics here have had an obvious upgrade and actually look really good. The characters are all decent looking and have suitably jiggly physics, which is always a plus. There's also a lot of titillation in here with the moves that they pull off and the noises they make, and you can move the camera around at some times so you can zoom in on their big old boobies. Sadly, they do seem to have gotten rid of the mud wrestling matches, unless I need to unlock it, but instead you have queen matches, where you fight in a ring surrounded by water, where the loser has to do a forfeit of something like a sexy pose or a game of limbo, or other things that involve them not wearing a lot and the camera needing to focus on their tits. Hooray. But as Keaton mentioned before, somehow this game just doesn't have the same amount of charm. and it kind of seems bare bones and is more interested in having the characters do sexy poses than a solid wrestling match. But to be fair, I do kind of have fun with it. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure, even though I never really knew what the hell was going on, though it's not really one I'll be going back to anytime soon, unless, you know. Anyway, that's enough sexy women. We want to look at muscular men, and they don't get much more muscular than the ones found in WWE All Stars, shown here on the exciting Xbox 360 video game system from Microsoft. All Stars is a crazy over-the-top take on wrestling, featuring characters from its past and at the time present. So you get to choose from the likes of Hogan, Bret Hart, Jake the Snake Roberts, Andre the Giant, as well as John Cena, Stone Cold, The Rock, CM Punk, Kofi Kingston, and more, with plenty to unlock and of course purchase as DLC. I have to say, the game is a little light on game modes. You've got exhibitions where you can choose from a few things like single matches, tag, elimination and even cage matches. Then you've got the Path of Champions mode, which is your classic fight loads of people and win belts. And then you've got the Fantasy Warfare matches, which actually are probably the highlight for me. These matches are ones that you would have loved to have seen and have the likes of Andre the Giant fight Big Show or Mr. Perfect against Miz. The way they work is they have characters that kind of have similar traits from the past and future, fight to see who is best. You get to choose which one you play as, which is nice, and this is where you'll unlock a lot of the new characters available, and I like it a lot. You've got about 10 characters to unlock as well as arenas and costumes, and it really keeps you coming back. The matches here are fast and furious and do not take themselves seriously at all. In fact, I'm sure I read somewhere at the time that this is more based on toys and the way that kids play with them in their imagination. This means the moves are crazy and over the top, and you'll be throwing your opponents miles into the air before slamming them down on their head from 50 feet. You can also bounce your opponents off the floor and keep doing combos on them. It's fun. You've got a strong and weak punch attack and kicks, as well as a grapple button. Characters have health bars, and as normal, holding different directions while attacking or grappling lets you do a few different moves, though I do have to say I thought there'd be more attacks here. Holding the strong attack button lets you do a massive punch or kick, and the same with grapples. These often send your opponents flying in the air. When you've done enough damage, you'll have built up a bar, and you've got 2 super moves as well as a finisher. Once you've built up your bar, you can press 2 buttons at the same time to do one of your super moves. These are of course where most of the crazy attacks come in, and are great to watch with a bit of slow-mo. But each character only has a couple of them. Then you have your finisher, which is done by pressing LB and RB at the same time. These are also really powerful and can KO your opponent quite easily. The controls work well, but I kinda wish they'd just gone for the No Mercy control setup, which would have allowed for even more things to do, as the fighting can feel a bit limited and shallow here. But that doesn't mean it's not fun, because it is. Being so over the top actually makes it stand out from the other wrestling games, along with the really cool art style, which I think some people may not like, but I actually quite like it. It's very cartoony and everyone is out of proportion, but it's good and there's some excellent animation. Then you've got JR and Jerry Lawler doing the commentary, which is always a good thing in a wrestling game, and of course you get all the proper intros for everyone. Overall, I find this one a lot of fun to play. It's not particularly in-depth, and I do wish there were more characters, but still, it's got plenty of content and is especially good with a couple of friends. It's also pretty damn cheap these days, so I definitely recommend checking it out. And finally for this long ass video, here is WWE 2K14, the most recent wrestling game that I own. I've had this in my collection for years, and this is actually the first time that I'm coming to play it. And you know what? I've really enjoyed what I've played so far. This is a more serious wrestling game, but it does do a good job of being a balance between arcade and sim. It's easy to pick up and play, but with plenty to learn for those that want to. First off, this game has a massive roster, with loads of characters needing to be unlocked through the various game modes. It has a nice mix of old and new wrestlers, so you've got your John Cena's, Randy Orton's, Santino Morella's, and the Great Khali's, but then you've also got Hogan, Warrior, Andre, and so on, which is always welcome, and I really think these games should always have as many old wrestlers as they can. You've got a ton of game modes here, with your usual exhibition matches, single matches, tags, infernos, ladders, hardcores, 1-on-1s, 2-on-2s, 3-on-3s, it basically covers everything, as it should, and I haven't had the time to try them all yet. My favourite mode though has to be the 30 Years of WrestleMania mode, where you play through some of the biggest matches from past WrestleManias, and these are just so much fun to play through. You play as all the old characters, and the game has a grainy filter over it to make it look like old broadcasts. You always play as the wrestler who wins the match, and what I really like is that there's conditions that you have to meet to beat the matches. Some of them are optional though. These will trigger cutscenes and quick time events, and you'll have to make sure you press the buttons at the right times to pull them off. Then you'll see highlights from the real match, but in the game graphics, and it's just so cool and a really nice touch, and it looks fantastic. There's even hidden ones you can do, and I was always determined to figure them out. The wrestling itself is good fun. You've got your usual attack and grapple buttons, and there's plenty of moves for each character. You also have modifier buttons, and the game lets you specifically target certain limbs or body parts to attack, which will injure your opponents and set them up for some nice submission attacks. You also get a handy on-screen prompt to help you with reversing, as well as hinting what attacks you can do, especially with your finishers. At first I thought these might be a bit annoying, but actually I think they're great, and you don't really notice them after a while, but they still subconsciously help you out. The graphics here are excellent, they look fantastic for a 2013-14 game, and every wrestler has been given loads of love in being modelled with great animation and details on them. Even the crowd looks good here, which is often a rare thing in video game wrestling. I do have to say that some of the animations are a bit odd and look a bit sped up and weird, like when you stomp on people, but it's not enough to really complain about. The 2K games have had a bit of a strange history, with some being seen as the worst wrestling games out there. I don't actually know what the review scores for this one are, but I can tell you that I really enjoyed playing it, and for me it's one of the best ones that I've played. It's also the only 2K one I've played. This one is also super cheap these days, and I highly recommend it if you want a more serious wrestling game.
We're going to explode tonight. Hogan rode the WWE Champion's coattails all year long.
So there you go, a ton of wrestling games that you might want to check out, and some that you might not. I want to say a huge thank you to Leathco and Keaton for being here at ringside with me and helping me out. Be sure to check out the Afterglow podcast, as well as all the ones that Keaton mentioned. There's a lot of good stuff there for gaming and wrestling fans alike. Links are in the description below. As always, let me know what other wrestling games I should be checking out, as there will definitely be a part 2 of this topic in the probably near future. And if you want your voice in any of my videos, just let me know and I'm sure we can sort it out. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time, brother.
What a reversal. Drives the elbow down again.